All right.
Yeah, okay.
Lovely. Perfect. Let's do this. Okay, good. We're going live and we are definitely live. Welcome everyone to live stream. I believe we're at number 89 of the Data on Kubernetes community. As always, it's a pleasure to have you with us. If you have not subscribed yet, smash that subscribe button right now. Also check us out on Twitter, on LinkedIn. Got a lot of things going on. Big piece of news. If you have made plans for October 12th already, you should cancel them because we have officially now announced our DoK day for KubeCon. You can see the schedule, all the different speakers that are going to be participating. We're having a bunch of news coming about that soon. We got a press release that's out, a lot of things that are going on. So definitely check that out. The registration is 100% free. So you can get in there, you can check out all the talks, got some really, really exciting things we're going to be having from both vendors and end users, all focused on these key issues of working with stateful workloads on Kubernetes, running databases, all the different things that come into that. So you definitely want to be there. The last event was a massive success. This one, we've already got over 560 people signed up, and we're just starting to make noise, just releasing the schedule today. Very excited about that. That being said, very happy to have Chris Adkin with us. Chris, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you, Bart.
Good. And you were saying previously about where you are based. You are based in the UK, but not just any city. Where are you at right now?
I'm based in the land of Robin Hood, that is Nottingham.
That is great. And do you have frequent encounters with the sheriff?
I do not know. Funnily enough, there is actually still a castle, and they have events there, and they have people dressed up in medieval garb, and even get into character. And you can walk in, have these guards near the entrance and say, you know, we. The sheriff demands that this be a happy day. You should look happy. It's so we have that sort of stuff, and you know they have odd events where there's people jousting on horses and shooting bows and arrows. So yeah, but not the obviously not the. I think there is a sheriff, but it's a bit more gentrified these days. So it's I don't know if I can't remember if it's a man or a woman, but it's somebody who's in formal attire and have a great big gold-looking chain with something hanging off it, but not a sheriff in the context of a bad guy who's on the hunt for Robin Hood.
Sounds more like a benevolent rapper with a big gold chain wrapped around their head.
Yeah, well, that works also. Yeah,
that's good. Okay, cool. So we got that part out of the way. But now, can you tell us a little bit more about your technical profile, how you started working with Kubernetes, and then we can jump right into your tech.
So my technical profile is that historically I come from the world of Microsoft. I've been a DBA, a developer, an architect in various different professional lives. The whole reason why I'm involved in this fantastic world that is Kubernetes is because, as you'll see from the presentation as it begins to unfold, is that the sort of technical direction of travel for Microsoft, certainly when it comes to their hybrid multi-cloud story, is around, lo and behold, Kubernetes, and it's kind of the Kubernetes is the tip of the spear for all the exciting hybrid and multi-cloud stuff they want to do. Ergo, that's why I'm involved in Kubernetes, and also in the day job as well with various things my employer has done. We've seen an explosion in demand for things which are Kubernetes related. So I've been pulled into the Kubernetes world via that also.
Okay. And why do you think there is such a high demand right now?
I think it sort of it frees developers, and to quote the likes of Kelsey Hightower, that Kubernetes is a platform for building platforms on. Kubernetes it provides a fantastic abstraction between infrastructure and the things that developers are interested in. It's cloud agnostic. So again, as you'll see from what I'm presenting, the sort of focus area of this presentation, it's stuff that you can use, and I'm giving away some spoilers here.
No, we don't want to. Let's get the deck open before we start releasing too many secrets.
You want a nice platform that provides a nice clean abstraction between all the stuff that developers are interested in and people building platforms high up the stack and the stuff that's infrastructure. There's nothing better than Kubernetes for providing that right now. That's got traction that most of the big cloud vendors are adopting. You can use it on any cloud and virtually any infrastructure.
Yep. Good. Well, that being said, let's jump into your presentation.
Okay, let me hit the share screen button. Let me fire the presentation first. Okay. Slideshow. Play. Okay. Let me.
No worries. And just a reminder to everyone who's joining us on YouTube, feel free to put your questions in the chat. We'll get them answered accordingly.
Yeah. Hang on. I'm looking for the screen share button.
No worries. It's we always say this. We're talking about data on Kubernetes, but few things are more frustrating than Zoom.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Let me see if it's this one.
Okay.
Share.
Got it. Awesome.
Okay, you got it? Yeah.
Yeah, perfect.
We have a go. Okay. So, bit about me. I've given you a brief rundown. In addition to the things I've already mentioned to you, Bart, I run this this monthly meetup, the Azure Cloud Native Data Platform User Group. I'm a co-founder along with this guy in Germany called Ben Wiseman, who's written various books on data platforms, on Azure and cloud native technology and stuff on Pluralsight. So that's on Meetup. We have a virtual event once a month, and I suppose TLDR, it's cloud native data platform stuff with an Azure flavor. Okay. I've also authored some Kubernetes material on Microsoft's official GitHub repo. That's to do with something that's kind of related to what I'm presenting today, and also I speak at Microsoft community events. Okay, so this is a vendor agnostic session, but from my the screen grab of how I appear on Twitter, you can probably work out who I work for. Okay, so that's me. What I'm going to do is a bit unusual, I guess. I'm going to launch straight into a demo, which is kind of going to set things up and set the tone for the rest of the presentation. So this is the Azure marketplace. Okay, and I'm going to deploy something from said marketplace. So I'm just going through a bunch of things here. I'm deploying a SQL Server managed instance. So I selected a location, service type, a load balancer. I'm providing some credentials. Okay, and I might have provided a spoiler before I've gone into this as to where this is going to go, but just hang fire.
Okay. Well, I'll pretend I didn't hear that. That's okay.
Yeah. Okay, so we're deploying this managed instance. We're going to go to the resources, and then, hey presto, there we are. Okay, so that is our SQL Server managed instance. We've deployed that straight from the marketplace. And the $64 million questions to our viewers is, where has this thing been deployed to? Okay, so let me move on. So where's this running? So this is running against a Kubernetes cluster running in a lab that I have access to in the Greater London area. Okay, so this is a screen grab from VMware vSphere. You can see 5 virtual machines on there. I've got two VMs for the control plane and 3 workers. So this is one of the big reasons why I've gone into Kubernetes, This is Microsoft's vision of multi-cloud and hybrid cloud, that you can deploy Azure-like data services, and you have the flexibility of deploying those to a Kubernetes cluster virtually anywhere. So that could be in somebody else's cloud, or it could be on premises. Okay, I grabbed this from my LinkedIn timeline today from you, Bart, and you'll say you got this fantastic piece of artwork from somebody who I don't know this guy. It sounds like he knows a lot about Kubernetes, but it looks like he's a great artist also.
Well, there's a story behind that, but I'm not going to give any spoilers away either, Chris. So don't worry.
Okay, so you'd be like, okay. So why should I run my data on Kubernetes? So I said right at the top that Kubernetes, it gives you this flexibility, and Microsoft's view of the world is, you know, we go back, I know, 10, 15 years ago, and it was, you know, thou shalt not use anything except Windows. With Satya Nadella on board, and you've got Brendan Burns, one of the co-founders, well, one of the original developers, inventors behind Kubernetes on board at Microsoft. Times have changed, and people want the flexibility to not be tied into specific infrastructure, specific clouds. In fact, what I'm presenting, this is Azure Arc enabled data services. Microsoft were making noises that one of the very first customers to deploy this in anger will be doing so on EKS on AWS. Okay, and there might be a whole bunch of reasons why you want an Azure-like data services on something that isn't Azure. So you might have invested heavily in somebody else's public cloud. You might, for data governance reasons, you might be tied into doing stuff that's on premises. You might also run your business in or parts of the world that aren't served by Azure regions. So I'm hearing stories that there's folks in Russia and also folks in Turkey for those very same reasons that they're interested in this. Okay, so Azure Arc enabled data services, this is the stack. Okay, so I've got storage at the bottom. So imagine, you know, there's some sort of layer cake like architecture going off. At the bottom layer of the cake, you have storage. Next up, you have a platform or a distribution that's based on Kubernetes. I've got some of the usual suspects in there. So things like OpenShift, EKS, GKE, KubeADM, that is vanilla Kubernetes, which you might want to deploy the hard way as per Kelsey Hightower's now famous repo, or you might want to deploy it using KubeSpray, which is what I do. That's your basic infrastructure. Next up, we have the foundation of what becomes Azure Arc enabled data services. So you have this thing with a sprocket symbol on. That's your data services controller. We have some actual databases on top of that, which at the moment is Postgres, Hyperscale, and Azure Arc enabled SQL Server. And then at the topmost layer of our cake, we have Azure. So this doesn't have to be deployed to Azure, but you need to register your controller with an Azure region, and you use that as kind of the control plane if you want to deploy stuff from the marketplace. Okay, and I'll come on to this later. If, say, for example, I don't know, you're a bank, some federal government organization who is not 100% happy with your stuff making calls out to the public cloud, you can deploy your control in what's called an indirect manner. You still use Azure, but as and when your controller makes calls up to the Azure cloud, you are 100% in control of that. Okay, so this, to recap, this is your basic infrastructure. Okay, this slide, this comes from a Microsoft marketing deck. The whole thing about Azure Arc is I'm focusing on the bit that basically gives you Azure dialect of database on as a service on Kubernetes anywhere. The bigger picture, as it were, includes the ability to run things like Azure Kubernetes, Azure Arc for services that allows servers that allow you to register servers and Kubernetes clusters with Azure, so you can see what's going on in terms of metrics and logging. You've got a single pane of glass for your infrastructure. There's also some other interesting things happening. So one of the most recent things that Microsoft have released this platform is Azure App Services for Arc. So that gives you the ability to run Azure functions, Azure apps, and also Azure Logic apps on a Kubernetes cluster. So it's kind of like giving you a Azure experience on virtually any Kubernetes cluster anywhere. Okay, tools. So in that little demo that I opened up with, I was using Azure Marketplace. You can also use the CLI. You can use Kubernetes native tools. So at the moment, this is mainly YAML manifest. I have heard noises that you might be able to deploy things with Helm in the future. You've got this thing called Bicep. So Bicep is kind of like, I say it's the next generation of ARM templates. It sits on top of ARM templates, and it looks a bit like Terraform in that you've got these things that are written in JSON. It's kind of vaguely Terraform like. You've got this thing called Azure Data Studio. I've got a demo. I'll show you guys that. And also Microsoft is saying that they'll do some work with a Terraform provider at some later to be confirmed date. Okay, so your basic starting point for all of this is obviously you need a Kubernetes cluster, and there's a number of supported platforms and distros at the moment, and I'll tell you guys what they are. But the basic starting point is you need to deploy a controller. Before you can deploy a database to this thing, you need a controller. And you can deploy these things in one or two modes. You've got this direct mode in which your controller, it'll automatically send logging and telemetry up to Azure. Also, it allows you to deploy things via the marketplace as well. And you've got this indirect mode, which, as I mentioned, if you're a bank, somebody in financial services, government, anybody that's highly operates in a highly regulated industry, that is probably where you'll gravitate to. And what this thing does is it kind of extends the Azure Resource Manager control plane to your Kubernetes cluster, wherever that might be. Okay. These are the supported distros at the moment. So this little line of code, AZ Arc Data DC config list. These are the distros of Kubernetes that you can deploy to, and platforms. That thing at the top with AKE at the moment, I think that is a flavor of Kubernetes that lives in the Alibaba cloud. But you've got all the popular distros in there. So you've got EKS, GKE, OpenShift. You've got OpenShift as a service on Azure, and obviously you've got AKS as well. Okay, so if you want an up-to-date list of the platforms that you can deploy Kubernetes for, just install the Azure CLI and run this command, and it will give you the best idea as to what that looks like. Okay. You can deploy a controller in a number of ways. One of the quickest and easiest way to do that is, again, via the Azure CLI. This is the simplest example that I can provide. The infrastructure is on premises, so when I tend to do this, I tend to do this to vanilla Kubernetes in my lab. Okay. Once you've deployed your controller, there's two different, I've got here Flavours, dialects of database that you can deploy to this. So you've got Azure Arc managed SQL Server instances. So this is compatible with SQL Server. It's kind of like your traditional scale-up database engine. And then you've got this thing called Postgres Hyperscale, which is 100% compatible with Postgres, but it's actually scale out. If you read Microsoft's documentation on this, they refer to something called Citus, or you'll come across that. What that is, it's a company which came up with a scale out version of Postgres. Microsoft bought these guys out, hence why you might come across Citus. That's CITUS in Microsoft's documentation. Okay, but what the aim is that you can deploy these to the platforms and Kubernetes distros I mentioned on the last slide. You'll get automatic updates to the container images, automatic backups, and you'll get the kind of one pane of glass to rule them all, which is Azure. Okay, so this is this little command. This is deploying a managed instance to a Kubernetes cluster that's got the controller running on. Okay, and what I've done here is I said I want 2 replicas. Okay, so I've highlighted replicas because obviously databases, people want high availability, which should not be confused for something that's fault tolerant. Okay, and I've just run this kubectl command just to make the point that even though I've got replicas here, I'm talking about 2 actual instances. Okay, so I'm not talking about replicas in the context of a replication controller, stateful set or a daemon set. So it's got HA that's baked into the platform that's very easy to enable. Okay, so this is the full fat version of the command. So I've highlighted a few things. So the security conscious amongst you, you might want to use Kubernetes secrets for login credentials. There's a --dev flag on there. So if you want to use this for development purposes, you can do so, and you won't get billed. I've highlighted the storage classes there. You can use a single storage class for the whole lot, or you can use specific storage classes, things like backups, data logs, and logs. So I'm not going to go through the whole command, but this is just to give you guys some sort of idea that this is it's quite extensive in terms of the way that Microsoft have thought this out. Okay, so Postgres Hyperscale, this is a bit different. This is scale out. You deploy what's called a server group. You have a concept of this thing called a coordinator, which is kind of the brain which farms out work to the things called the workers. Okay, so obviously these sit on top of Kubernetes worker nodes, but also in context of your server group, you have these workers in the actual group. You have one database per server group. and what you can do is you can shard Postgres tables across your workers. Okay, so this thing is elastic. So once you've deployed this, you can actually scale it out. You can start with a certain number of workers. You can increase that number. Obviously, it depends on the resources you've got in your Kubernetes cluster, how many worker nodes you've got, what's running on those other worker nodes. So the thing I should point out is even if you don't have a Postgres Hyperscale worker running on a particular worker node, you will have other things that kind of form the base infrastructure, things associated with the controller running on those workers also. And where Microsoft are going with this, so this is not my slide. This is a slide that comes from a marketing deck, and what I've got on there is I've highlighted future data services, and the sort of grand plan or the vision is to bring more things that you can only find in Azure in the cloud at the moment to this platform. So I don't work for Microsoft. I can't speak for them, but you can imagine.
But you do steal resources from their marketing decks.
Yes, guilty as charged. Yeah.
As a good citizen of Nottingham, robbing from the rich to feed the poor.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so you've sidetracked me there.
Sorry.
Anyway.
Sorry.
That's all right. So I don't want you to run away or go away with the idea that the only things that you'll ever be able to run on this platform are Postgres and the Azure cloud version of SQL Server. So future data services, what are we talking about here? So we might, and again, with the caveat and might in inverted quotes, it might include things like Cosmos DB, MySQL, MariaDB, things like Azure Data Explorer. So this thing is evolving, it's moving. At the moment, Microsoft appeared to be coming out with a release every month. Okay, and I kind of expect that release cadence to continue. Okay. The other thing that you can do with this is you can create these things called custom locations. What you need to do is you need to register your Kubernetes cluster with Azure Arc for Kubernetes, and there's a number of commands that you need to run to satisfy the prerequisites. Once you've done that, it's a single command. In your Azure resource group, you'll see your Kubernetes cluster, okay, and you'll get resource telemetry, logging information. There's a few other things that you'll be able to see. You install this thing called an extension for Azure Arc Data Services, and then what you can do is you can create what's called a custom location. So at the demo at the very beginning, I deployed my Azure Arc Managed SQL Server instance to the UK South custom location, okay? And that's basically, that location is my lab in this little suburb of London that's not far from Heathrow Airport. So what you can do is you can effectively label your Kubernetes clusters so that when somebody comes along and they want to deploy their own databases, they can select these custom locations. Okay, so this is what things look like once you've registered your Kubernetes cluster with Azure Arc. So I've got a custom location here called Staines Lab. I've got my Kubernetes cluster, which I've been incredibly imaginative with when naming it. So I've called it K8's hyphen cluster. So no imagination spared there. Okay. You've got a bunch.
I do have to ask, sorry for clarification. I hate to sidetrack you more. Is this the stains that were LEG is based?
It's the stains, not just where LEG is based, but it's the legendary stains where LEG comes from.
Okay.
And also because I'm also going to enrich your life by telling you it's also the stains where linoleum originates from.
Oh my God. That's a fun fact.
Yeah, I expect you to be blown away for the next month at the very least by virtue of the fact I've imparted that fun fact to you.
I've got a lot of research to do. Anyway,
no, actually, if you walk through the I'm going there tomorrow. If you walk through the town centre, there's this there's this almost like a sculpture, these two men carrying this big roll of lino. So
I'm going to link that right now in the YouTube chat. So if anybody wants to check that out.
Yeah, you should consider yourself feeling culturally enriched.
I don't need any more fun facts for the day, having heard that. Thank you, Chris.
Right. Anyway, so looking at this on the left-hand side, there's a bunch of things. You've got security policies. You can set up policies. You'll be able to click on the cluster and you'll be able to see things like metrics on CPU consumption, memory consumption on your worker nodes, logs. This is a bit of a taster of what Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes looks like. And if you want to do this, I mean, you can do it with vanilla Kubernetes. I've heard of people that have registered their clusters which are running on Raspberry Pi clusters. It could be something that's on a Intel NUC, something that's running on top of VMware in your lab. Yeah, you can sort of dip your toe in the water with this very easily. The other thing that it gives you is it gives you GitOps integration. So I'm guessing that you've had people on this stream have spoken about GitOps.
Oh yeah.
So I'm guessing that you might have even had the likes of Alexis Richardson from Weaveworks.
No, I have not, but I do have a very good friend, Leonardo Murillo, who works at Weaveworks. But I've also heard I heard Alexis being interviewed on the Kubernetes podcast from Google by Craig Box, and very, very interesting interview, very interesting background.
Okay, well, the point being is that Microsoft have done some work with the Flux operator from Weaveworks. So this thing here, this enable GitOps integration, you can click on that. You can add a GitOps configuration, and I believe it integrates with the Azure policy managers. So the whole point of this is that you register your Kubernetes cluster with Azure Arc, and you get the ability to install the Weaveworks Flux operator with integration into the Azure Policy Manager for free. Okay, so I've got another demo here. So this time, this is Azure Data Studio. So this thing, it's based on Eclipse. If you think it looks vaguely like it, you can run this on Windows, Mac, Linux. So this is that was a Grafana dashboard that we went into for the Azure Managed SQL Server instance. You can use things like I'm showing you notebooks here, so you can play around with stuff in notebooks for playing around with your managed instance. So that's the Python 3 kernel there. You can deploy stuff from it as well. Okay, so that's a very quick whistle-stop tour of Azure Data Studio. Okay, storage. A quick word on storage. Few history buffs out there This is a guy, as you can probably imagine, I'm guessing he's from the 60s, pointing something at what is it's a disk drive associated with the IBM RAMAC. It's the world's first commercial hard drive. You need storage. You need it for two things. When you deploy your controller, that has some persistent volumes associated with it. So you need storage for your controller in the first instance. Obviously, you need storage for your Azure Arc managed SQL Server instances and your Postgres Hyperscale server group. Microsoft, they don't mandate that your whatever storage plugin your storage class is associated with, they don't mandate that they have to be, I've got a CSI compliant, but they just basically have to support persistent volumes, okay? And as I mentioned, you need them from the controller, you manage instances, and your Postgres Hyperscale server groups. You can use a single storage class for the whole lot. Microsoft gives you the ability to use storage classes for different things. I'll touch on disaster recovery briefly. Obviously, a really nice analogy around disaster recovery is wherever you send your backups to, ideally try and make that somewhere different to the place that's hosting your databases in a storage context. When I first started out in IT, I went this training course, and this guy said, if you do that, it's kind of like your car going off the edge of a cliff, and you're finding out that your insurance documents are in the glove box. So don't do that. Okay. Some good rules of thumb. You don't have to use a CSI compliant plugin. However, given that the direction of travel of the Kubernetes storage special interest group is heavily CSI focused. In fact, much of what they're doing is coalescing around a CSI standard. It's probably not a bad thing to go with a storage plugin that adheres to the CSI standard. Okay. In particular, those that allow for volume expansion. So if you need to expand persistent volumes and your plugin doesn't allow you to do that, that's probably not a great place to be. In terms of QoS, obviously, if you're backing things up, so the way this works is it uses the backup mechanisms that are associated with the native databases, which produce backup files. So what you probably want to do is you probably want a storage class which supports different qualities of service. So for backups, you probably want something that is going to somewhere other than the place that's hosting your databases, and B, it supports high write bandwidth. Okay. And you might also want something that supports the ability to automatically rebind persistent volumes in the event that your pods and other things are rescheduled so that they jump from one worker node to another. One more thing, it seems that the ecosystem of backup tools for Kubernetes is burgeoning.
That's true. Yeah.
And I'm guessing you've had guys from these vendors that have presented.
Yes, we have. Yeah, and from Kasten, we have a Storage OS meetup coming up pretty soon, and we actually had one just last week with Salman Iqbal, who's actually speaking this week in Kubernetes Community Days London, or UK rather, and he was talking all about backup and restore. So no, it's a hot topic.
Yeah, absolutely. So the way that many of these tools work is, so if you take Postgres, for example, you'll have some sort of hook that calls something in Postgres that quiesces the IO for the database. It takes a snapshot of the persistent volumes, and then it perhaps copies them to object storage somewhere. So that might be S3 in the cloud, S3 on premises, Azure Blob Storage. And then once the snapshot has finished and it's gone off to wherever it needs to go in terms of object storage, IO will be forward. Okay. With these things, Microsoft, they don't ship anything in the container images to do that. Their stance is that you shouldn't be calling things inside the container to actually freeze and unfreeze IO. I've got to play around with this on the to-do list. You might be able to call something to do a checkpoint on the database and perform the snapshot. So if you've got any, if you use any tools which snapshot persistent volumes, just be mindful of this. Be mindful of the fact that if you're using any other different database engine and you call something inside a container to freeze and unfreeze IO, this isn't there with Azure Arc for data services at the moment, and I don't know if it's going to be. Okay, so but there are ways and means around that, but you would need to do your own due diligence.
And regarding this, in terms of integrations with other storage options like OpenEBS, do you have any experience with that?
OBDS.
Oh, OpenEBS. Sorry, OpenEBS. Or Longhorn. I'm just thinking of other ones that are in the CNCF sort of ecosystem.
I don't. I mean, I won't. To cut a long story short,
it's okay.
The one I mainly play around with is the one from my employer.
Makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, the long and short of it is basically, yeah, I mean, any storage plugin out there that supports persistent volumes, it should just work. Above and beyond that, yeah, you know, you'd have to do your own testing and do your own due diligence, but you know, this is absolutely not tied into any specific storage ecosystem other than
got it. Yeah,
what you use, it must support persistent volumes. All good?
Yep.
Okay, so you've got your Robin Hood joke in. Have you got any more?
We talked about stains. Well, you'll see. Remember, you said no spoilers. So
yeah, okay. You've got data protection baked into the platform with the Azure Arc managed SQL Server instances at the moment. And I should caveat all of this by saying that this is moving quite fast at the moment. That Microsoft, at the moment, the release cadence appears to be once a month at the moment. But you can do point-in-time recovery. This little YAML manifest illustrates how you would do it with Azure Arc managed SQL Server. So data protection, it's not the most interesting thing in the world, but if you manage anything that's stateful, generally most people have always said to me, one of the first things that you need to make sure is that you can recover stuff. So that's why I mentioned that. I'm going to mention some useful resources as well. So Microsoft have got this thing called Jumpstart. So it covers just about most facets of deploying Azure Arc to different clouds and different platforms. The whole idea behind this is to get you up and running as fast as possible. I've played around with the Azure Arc Jumpstart for data services on AWS. It appears that many of them use Terraform. So if you don't use Terraform, it's a great tool for learning Terraform. If you do, it's giving you something that you'll probably got that warm, fuzzy feeling of being familiar with. So as I said, I tried this out last Christmas. It worked really well on AWS. I decided to throw some more resources at it, and lo and behold, I've contributed towards Jeff Bezos's trip into outer space. And I thought, you know, as nice as that is, and, you know, as nice as it is for him to, you know, get in his ship, I've actually got a lab, okay, of resources that are free to me. Why don't I come up with something that allows me to use these free resources? So what I came out with this thing. It's in a GitHub repo called Azure Arc Data Services Fast Start. And I've laid this thing up into modules. So what you can do is, if you've got VMware in a lab somewhere, you can build out the base virtual machines based on an Ubuntu image, which you can then build your Kubernetes cluster on. Because I've layered this, if you're doing this on on any other kind of infrastructure, bare metal, you've got Intel NUCs, you've got a Raspberry Pi cluster, you can then deploy the Kubernetes cluster on top of that. I've got a module for deploying a Metal LB load balancer. I've got something in there for deploying the storage solution for my employer, but you can use whatever you want to use. And then finally at the top, I've got stuff for deploying the controller. Okay. And again, the whole reason I came up with this is because if you've got something that is free to use or something that you can use and you haven't got the worry of doing something on a Monday, forgetting about it, coming back the following Monday and then finding out, hey, I've got this this cloud bill I wasn't expecting to pay. That's something you can use. Okay, so that kind of wraps things up. Questions?
So a couple of different things, in terms of what you looked at, as someone who, like you said, has a fair amount of Microsoft experience. And what's been interesting as well for us to see is how the different responses, whether it's AKS, EKS, GKE, seeing these sort of, different ways of doing things. Do you really feel that we are moving away from vendor lock-in, or do you feel that this is still a reality that we have yet to sort of shake off, talking about hybrid cloud, multi-cloud?
I think we are. Yeah. I mean, I in my day job, I do actually see this. I do actually see that people don't want to, and I'm not for a second saying that one cloud's better than another, or you should gravitate to particular vendors, but for sure I'm seeing people use more than one public cloud. And I'll give you another story. I know there's organizations out there that have got considerable cloud spend. They've got bills in the 7-digit range.
Yeah. Wow.
By moving to architectures that are based on cloud native technology, so i.e. Kubernetes and containers, and moving away from things that are only available on that particular cloud, which tie them into that cloud. Let's just say it opens up doors in terms of billing flexibility and wiggle room in terms of getting the bill down, that knowledge that the cloud provider has, that you're not rigidly tied into them, that you've got this flexibility to go elsewhere.
I think that's a good point. And when, as the definition suggests, that is, as you said, vendor lock-in. I think, and with the cost factor, well, a couple things. The portability factor, that, because when we talk about why run data on Kubernetes, one thing is the what, another thing is the how, and another thing is a why. We sort of outlined some different whys, and I think you've touched on two of them. Cost, in terms of automation, and if you end up getting, automation can help you get out of cost. And if you're only stuck with, managed Kubernetes tools, as the aforementioned GKE, AKS, and EKS, then that can sort of limit you. And we've also seen the arrival of, different tools like KubeCost that give people better information about, what works best. And we also had a talk with Michael Cade from Kasten, who was talking about Kubester, which is an open source tool that helps people do benchmarking when it comes to storage options. Taking this question a little bit further about, working with data on Kubernetes, do you feel, well, obviously, I think we are in agreement that yes, you would say that it can be done. What are the biggest barriers? Do you think that it's because of a technological challenge, because of a talent issue, because of a cost issue? What do you think is still sort of the obstacles in order to make this more widespread?
I think one of the obstacles is a general understanding. So I was at the last KubeCon in Barcelona, and there's actually a storage track, and there's somebody I know, not working through I work for, they gave a lightning talk on storage, and it was kind of a bit of a back to the future thing. It was about DR, it was about snapshots, it was about replication, and it was people absolutely loved this. So people lapped this up, and quite rightly so, and were taking pictures of this guy's slide. And I think the thing is, I think one of the first port of calls when it comes to doing anything stateful in the public cloud, it's been things like database as a service. And I think there's been a bit of a knowledge gap in terms of understanding storage platforms and Kubernetes, because, the fact that people's first port of call has been things where they don't have to worry about this. So I think there's been that. I think also with containers in general, I think when they were first conceived, they were targeted at stateless workloads. I think that's a factor.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of complexity in the Kubernetes ecosystem. I think that might cloud things as well. But yeah, I mean, just sort of generally those things, I would say.
I think those are very strong factors too. And like you said, is that although Kubernetes is still quite a young technology, if everybody starts out with in mind that everything's just going to be done statelessly and not even consider, running stateful workloads, it's natural that there's some kind of resistance going towards that. Yeah. However, what you were saying as well too, some companies cannot have, that are still doing everything on-prem. They, for compliance, security reasons, will also be, more, I would think would probably adhere more to, okay, let's do everything statefully, from the get-go. But like you said, the knowledge gap, it is there. And I'm curious as well too, as someone who's seen all these developments going on for a while, how has your learning process been? Because, like you said, and that's one of the things that's challenging about Kubernetes is really, properly learning it. For you, what's worked best? Whether it's been doing courses, just getting your hands dirty. What's your strategy when you're encountering a new technology like Kubernetes?
My strategy has basically been around two prongs. It's been with just basically rolling the sleeves up and trying this stuff out, and also I've benefited massively from tribal knowledge. Okay, so who I work for, and I guess this is the case for other vendors as well. You've got people who are heavily involved in, say, the Kubernetes storage special interest group, and it's kind of like
sure.
It's kind of like a mothership, which knowledge filters down, and it filters down the organization, and there's sort of parts of the organization that I hook and feed into, where I sort of acquire that knowledge in a sort of sort of tribal sort of way.
But I think it says a lot to the expression, like the best way to get involved is to get involved. And I think that's why so many companies want to be a part of, whether it's SIG storage or working in different open source foundations, because it gives them direct access to the newest technologies and makes that learning curve not so steep.
Yeah, so I think the thing is, even if you're not working for somebody who's heavily involved in developing things in the Kubernetes ecosystem, there is most definitely a fantastic community out there for learning stuff from.
Yeah, no, I think it's the exact same thing that came up in our meetup last week, live stream last week about backup and restore, was that Kubernetes is a technical challenge that has a people-based solution. And I think that's what you're saying, is by participating in these kind of, community-based initiatives, sharing doubts and issues that folks might have. Specifically to this one though, about Azure Arc, are there any resources in particular that you would recommend?
So I'd recommend, for getting you dipping your toe in the water, I would recommend the Jumpstart. So if you just go into the a search engine of your choice.
Mm-hmm.
Just type in Azure Arc Jumpstart. So Microsoft they've got a ton of repos on GitHub for that, and also they've got some websites which are basically a shop front for their stuff on Jumpstart.
Okay, good. Well, I just posted on the link because some folks were asking about that because wanting to take this a little bit further. That seems to be a good resource. Can we finish by asking, based on where we're at right now, what are the things that you expect to happen in the next few years as we talk about whether it's data, services, about storage, about different things? What are the things that you expect to happen, let's say, within the next 6 months to a year?
I expect the sort of boundary between what you can do on premises in the public cloud to blur.
Mm-hmm.
I expect Kubernetes to underpin that. I'm seeing this now, in the day job, more and more, Kubernetes and containers, it's becoming the de facto platform to develop on. That's happening right now. And I expect people to, in general, just develop platforms which span different clouds, span on premises on the public cloud, and for Kubernetes to underpin all that. I guess at some stage, and I think Joe Beeder's said this somewhere, that he hopes that Kubernetes gets boring, it'll become ubiquitous. And again, to quote the great Kelsey Hightower, it's a platform for building platforms, and there'll become a point where it'll just be, I don't know, I guess sort of blend into the wallpaper, and it'll be the stuff that people are building on top, which will be interesting.
Yeah, I think those all very, very good points. Like you said, the blurring the lines between on-prem and public cloud. A lot of things that you mentioned as well too previously in your presentation. So very, very good insights. Last thing that can I get you to do? Can I get you to stop sharing your screen?
Yeah, you can. Yeah.
Okay. I will share mine briefly. So as you mentioned with your wonderful screen grab of the LinkedIn post from Randy Abernethy, which was a very interesting talk that we had last week. That was not him that did that drawing, but we have a resident artist who is with us in all of our live streams. And so I'm going to share my screen now. And so he was also drawing, doing a visual rendition of the things that were being mentioned. Obviously there was a lot of stuff, so to be able to get everything is quite a challenge. But it's something we always like to share with our speakers so that we can have a sort of memento of the things that were mentioned. Unfortunately, the Stains Linoleum Legacy did not make it in, so we will ask for an update to make sure that gets featured when we put that on social media. But anyway, Chris, it was wonderful having you on. Definitely need to have you back. You mentioned that you're going to be speaking at another event, I believe, next month. Yeah,
I'm speaking at this event called South Coast Summit. So if you know the UK at all, it's at this place called the Aegis Bowl, just in the Greater Southampton area. So that's on the South Coast. So yeah, I will be there.
Very, very good. Spreading the truth and inviting other people to get involved with Azure Arc and all things related to stateful data on Kubernetes. Chris, thanks again for giving us your time today. And like I said, we definitely look forward to having you again.